Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. When we're working in manufacturing, there's this balance between focusing on what you're responsible for and helping others and working as one team within your organization. And sometimes we get stuck on what is being helpful and where are your responsibilities and what's the benefit of being helpful? Because I know that I've had many times in my career where I was just laser focused on what I needed to get done. And I've got my friend, Susan Baier, who's a professional speaker, researcher, and marketing agency owner who is relentlessly helpful. So helpful, she's come on the podcast to help us understand this better today. Thank you, Susan.
Great to be here, Trevor. So fun.
So let's get into this relentlessly helpful. This term and this idea is just resonating in my mind since I've met you, and you've really helped me with this whole concept. What does relentlessly helpful mean to you?
You know, for me, I tell people that relentlessly helpful means asking not just how can I help, but then also asking how else can I help? It's really about thinking about how you can help the people around you, your colleagues, at work. If you're in a sales position, your prospects. If you've got clients that you're working with, what else can you do to move them forward? And a lot of what I talk about is within the context of building a reputation as an organization that is really there to help. Even if people can't hire you yet, maybe you're out of their price point or something like that, but they're listening to you. You have folks listening to your podcast all the time, Trevor, and your podcast is relentlessly helpful because you're not expecting anything from those folks. They don't have to pay you to hear you and the guests that you have. You're just being helpful. You're trying to help folks get through their day a little more easily and give them some of what you know.
Yeah, that's a good example because I do get asked, so, what are you making off this podcast?
Yeah, right.
It's really what I'm making is the joy when I get to talk to someone that says, hey, I listened to Susan Baier and I use this approach and it worked. And I'm continuing to do that now. And I didn't think about that. So there's just that whole, you're putting that out to the universe aspect.
Yeah. And you don't have to own a business to do this. You don't have to be a professional speaker like you are, Trevor, to do this or have a podcast. This is something that we can all do. And it's really a mindset shift to thinking about all day, every day, like in the smallest ways, you can have an impact on people. We all know things that someone doesn't know that would be helpful to them. So it's really just sort of a way of walking through the world. I don't mean to sound like a saint. I am not. But certainly with respect to the things the approaches you might have, the things you've learned, that could be really helpful to somebody. And the great thing about it is it doesn't just help whoever you're trying to aid, it actually makes you feel great. It can make the difference between a so-so day at work and a day where you come home feeling like, wow, I really made a difference for somebody today, and that feels good.
So we're a lot more about stories than lessons, and you're an amazing storyteller, Susan. So where did this begin with you?
Oh, so many years ago, Trevor. So I was in college, and it was a couple months before graduation, and I realized I was going to have to get a job. I had never had a job. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. It was a stunning realization because I really hadn't spent college working towards a particular career, right? You know this, your audience is going to laugh at this, but my major was in literary writing and 17th century poetry with a minor in medieval art and architecture, and my dad was like, what are you going to do with that? And I really didn't know. I hadn't thought about college in that way. So I had to get a job. And my advisor had a friend in Boston. I was in school in Hartford, and he had a friend in Boston who was willing to give me an interview for advertising. I didn't know a first thing about advertising. I'd never had a business class. I'd never had a marketing class. I didn't know anything, but I had this guy who was going to give me an interview. So
Okay.
So, buy a new suit, head up to Boston, end up in this high rise in Boston. And I'm on one of the top floors, and I get ushered into this huge office that had like floor to ceiling windows looking out over the skyline. And it actually had a putting green in the in this guy's office. And I showed up, I didn't know anything, Trevor, and I'd really tried to be prepared. But I think as he started to look through the materials that I brought, he realized that I knew nothing about this. And this guy billed out at, I don't know what his rate was. I found out later that he was the senior creative director of one of the top advertising agencies in the world. And I was in his office, just a stupid kid with no idea what I was doing. But instead of kicking me out, which he should have done, he canceled the meetings following his appointment with me and spent the rest of the afternoon teaching me about the advertising business and what the roles were. He knew from what I'd brought with me that I was clearly not destined for one of the creative roles. But he sort of laid it out and said, look, here's what advertising is. If you want to work in this, here's the different roles. Like, I came out of that with really an understanding of what I was maybe getting into from an advertising perspective. So that was great in itself. Like, that was incredibly generous of this guy to do. But at the end of that meeting, I was, getting ready to hustle out of the office. And I heard him say, how else can I help? And that was astounding to me because he'd already been so generous. And he called 2 other agency owners and set up interviews with me that same day before I drove back to Hartford. And that's why I became an agency owner. That's why I got into advertising and marketing, which I've been doing for a shockingly, geez, it's almost 40 years now that I've been in advertising and marketing. And, it was that extra moment. Like, I'd experienced people being generous before, but going that whole way and then saying to yourself, how else can I help, was a revelation to me. And I didn't even realize how much at the time until I got further along in my career and have seen how incredibly rare that is for someone who really knows a lot. I do research, Trevor, you know this, and a lot of people who follow business experts like you, like 3/4 of them in our research, think that this kind of thing is mostly worthless. It's just all about showing off your ego or pitching your services. And it's not, we've all felt that like pump and dump thing, right? Where you're like, hey, we're hiding our stuff behind a contract, but if you give us $10,000, we're going to tell you our secrets. And it's really rare, unfortunately, that the people who have a lot of experience and have new perspectives that can help the rest of us often are not sharing that information in a way that we can access it because they're scared. They're afraid you're not going to hire them, or they're afraid that you're going to go take what they know and they're going to use it to compete with them or something. So it's really, really rare. And it was really striking to me at the time. And what I've learned through the research that we do, as well as our own agency experience and that of our clients, is that just thinking like this and being generous like this reaps huge rewards for a business. I mean, it just brings such goodwill. It brings a tremendous amount of word of mouth, right? About how great this business is to work with, how incredible their values are, or whatever. It lets you be recognized as the expert that you are in whatever you do, so that people can reward you for that. They pay you more for what you do, or you get a promotion because they see, wow, this guy really knows what he's talking about, because you're not hiding your light under a bushel, basically. So it's really powerful, and it's become something that I think that more of us who have a long career, who have expertise, need to be thinking about doing. Whether you're speaking on a stage, Trevor, or you're on a podcast, or you're just on the shop floor helping somebody get over a problem that you know how to solve.
It's an interesting mindfulness aspect of, by sharing more of what you know and being more helpful, it actually makes you more of a thought leader, instead of trying to like hold those cards in and like, I don't want to risk someone else taking my thoughts. And
Right.
Mindset of lack as opposed to abundance. And then abundance is manufacturing is struggling to fill positions and attract talent because it doesn't always feel helpful. It often feels the opposite. It feels draining because it's like, we want more. We want more of this, and we want more hours, and
it's exhausting. I mean, I've worked in marketing all the time. I worked for Dial for many years. I wasn't on the plant floor, but my husband worked in manufacturing aerospace manufacturing for a long time. And, you know, he would come home and just sort of feel like, well, I was a cog in the machine again today, you know, Groundhog Day, I'll go back and do it again tomorrow. And work can feel like that sometimes. I don't care what industry you're in. It can feel very rote and it can feel unrewarding. And sometimes this approach is an opportunity to make it not feel like that, especially because sometimes being relentlessly helpful is providing something that actually isn't part of your job or your current job. We've all had a path, right, through our careers. So you may know something that you can help somebody with that isn't really technically part of your job. And that's when the magic happens. Like, wow, you know, you actually can help somebody regardless of whether it's in your specific role or not. And you come home feeling a little differently. And you know, Ron, he's pretty relentlessly helpful.
Yeah. Oh, he's relentless. I was just going to say, he's relentlessly positive.
Yes,
and
he is.
You would take the most positive mindset, but when you get into a routine, and manufacturing has a routine, but it doesn't have to feel that way. And that's really the purpose of this podcast, is to help people driving into work thinking that, hey, what if we were all relentlessly helpful? Because I can think of times where I was looking down on an internal supplier of parts and basically saying, you guys got to step it up, you know, when really I was not helpful. You know, even my mindset where I've been like, man, I know you guys are doing your best. And here's what I'm really taking away from you, Susan. It's not the first one. It's like saying, how you doing?
Yeah.
I'm fine. How are you doing? What? Okay. But how are you really doing?
How are you really doing? Yep.
Yeah. Like it takes a second one and the same thing. Hey, need any help? Are you good? All right. See you later.
Yeah, exactly.
The magic moment for you is when he kind of like, after he's helped you a bit, like, what else can I do to help?
Yeah. I think that's where you really are distinctive from just being kind, a good human being. And when you're really leaning in and thinking about what you could do to really make a difference. I mean, that guy in Boston, that was 40 years ago for me, Trevor. And I still every day think about what could I do to make that guy proud of me, to pay him back for that, like to pass it forward, you know? And some days have more opportunities than others. And some days I don't feel it and I'm not feeling good. But man, just thinking, if your listeners could just maybe capture that little line and think about it sometime during the day today, how else can I help? Is there something else? Is there someone else that I can connect this person with that may be able to solve this situation? Is there somebody I know in my network that might be helpful? Is there a resource that I found really helpful that might be helpful to them? Do I have direct knowledge or experience of a situation where I could maybe add something, a little advice? And it's not coming in and going, you know what, you're doing this all wrong, so I'm going to tell you what to do. It's how can you help someone feel more confident, feel more expert? How can you help someone else feel better about their day? And if you do it, I guarantee it will make you feel better about yours.
I can feel that. I just feel good listening to you say it.
Well, you know what? It's how the human brain is wired. This is what makes us feel good. This is what makes us trust people. This is makes us want to help other people and bring them into an experience that's good for us. It's how our brain is wired. But I think that, work is hard. It's long, it's repetitious. And sometimes we don't have those experiences. But the great thing about this is the recipient gets that feeling and you get that feeling too.
Well, Susan, what do we do when we have two leaders in a plant and the one leader wants to help and knows that they can help? And the other leaders just, he's gone and he's kind of like asked what he can do to help. And you know that there's a pride issue there, right?
Yeah. That comes from somewhere.
Yeah. Or, that's a judgment statement even. I don't even know if it comes from pride.
But it can't, but I mean, we're all impacted by wanting to look good in front of those who are evaluating us. And sometimes it's an overabundance of confidence that makes us act that way. Sometimes it's an overabundance of a lack of confidence that makes us want to show up like we already know everything because we feel like asking for help or receiving help makes us look weak. So, on an individual basis, there's only so much you can do. You walk through the world being relentlessly helpful. But I think organizationally, this is a value that organizations can absolutely embrace. If you have a culture where people are not afraid to say, I'm stuck, or I'm struggling, or I need help, if they're not threatened by the possibility of being assessed differently because of that, then you can build a culture where this is really pervasive. And there are organizations who have done this. But yeah, if you have a culture that's really, and I worked in corporate for a long time, and I wish I could say that all of the cultures were wonderful. And they're not. If you're in a culture where there's a lot of backbiting and jealousy and people trying to climb over people to get to the top and make others look bad, it's really hard to feel like you can be relentlessly helpful. But you still can in your own space. But if you have the influence in an organization to lead culturally, to help determine values and spread them throughout the organization. If you're managing managers who are managing other people, how can you help your managers create an environment like this with the people that they manage? You can turn the tide on this for sure.
In our four walls within this building that we work within, usually, how is that going to be perceived? Me getting help, whether it's more coaching from an external coach, whether I need, more support in this technical area, or maybe with this leadership, and our language and kind of what that looks like and how we view those people. And I guess it can start with that one person, one offering the help, and maybe even showing that you're okay receiving the help.
Yeah, but you're right, because unfortunately, not every workplace is set up to honor the value of continued growth and support that in people. Some are really just competitive, and it comes from leadership. It's a values thing, Yeah. So I hope most of your listeners are not in that kind of a role. But even if that isn't part of the organizational culture where you're at, you can still have an impact on people. Even if it's taking somebody to lunch and saying, hey, I know you're really struggling with this. I have some ideas and I'm here to support you. And if there's anything I can do, and maybe I'm going to connect you with somebody on the outside who knows more about this and may be able to give you a little support. And it doesn't have to be in a public forum where everybody can see, where maybe the recipient, who's probably not had this kind of, this kind of action before, feels embarrassed because you're coming up to them publicly and saying, hey, you look like you're really having a hard time. So you can do it offline with folks and still have an impact, even in an environment where they might feel threatened or embarrassed to have that conversation in front of others.
Yeah. And I'm even thinking of plants that I know that they have I would call it a good culture. It's not like a super competitive culture. It's a good culture, but there's not the relentlessly helpful happening every day, because there still is that level of pride. So I think it's some intentionality around the senior leaders, like promoting that help and then congratulating, saying, hey, I love the fact that you got Ron to come over and from engineering, and that, you're helping him. And then, you're complimenting Ron because he's helping.
Yeah. We know the power of managers in an organization, especially in manufacturing. They really have a lot of things. And, we all come up with different messages. My son is almost 30. He's a welder, and he just got promoted to shop foreman. And he was over. Yeah, it was great. And he was over last night, and he goes, this is crazy. I can't believe they did this. I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, if you already knew how to be a shop manager, you wouldn't have gotten this job. You would have gotten the next one. Right? You have to learn on the job a lot of what you know how to do. So sometimes we have a mindset that we are in a role and we're supposed to know everything perfectly. That's the deal. We have to already know it. That's not true. Learning on the job is a critical component of advancement. So sometimes just maybe remember that, if you feel like my son did, and realize it's okay to have stuff to learn. It's okay to learn from more experienced people. It's okay to make mistakes. Some of that's in us. Sometimes it's in the culture, but sometimes it's just in us. It's baked in.
It's not optional for manufacturing, because often the person beside us, we're dependent upon their success for us to be successful.
Right.
That's what makes this episode is really important, because if we can have more conversations around that, especially in good plants, because I think most plants have good plants. There's the odd one that has a really bad culture, and this probably isn't, may be harder to implement.
They tend to not not last very long. If you have a toxic culture, something sooner or later is going to bite you in the butt.
So I think on the, most plants are good. And if you can start using some of this more and just bringing it up, like what, and I think that second question of what else would be helpful, because then you just don't let it go, right? And say, no, like seriously, how do you know if, because you may have ideas, you want to do something, but how do you know when it's helpful or not helpful?
Well, like any communication, it's conversation. You got to listen to somebody to know how to be able to help them. If you know that somebody is really working on a particular skill, if they've told you that, if they're like going, geez, man, I'm really having trouble getting this right on this particular thing, then you can think about how to help them. What do you have in your toolkit that can be of help, whether that's a resource or a mentor or some extra time after work to kind of work on part of the process, or something. You gotta, you can't go around saying, I'm going to be helpful and I don't give a damn what you need. I'm just going to be helpful and you're going to take it. That's not good.
I'm helpful.
No, I mean, it comes with listening. But if you have this mindset, Trevor, you start to listen for ways in which you could be helpful. Sometimes I'll be at a convention or something and I'll be in a group of people sort of talking at the cocktail hour, and I hear somebody say, man, I wish I knew how to get into that. I don't really understand how to get connected with those kind of people. Well, I can hear that and say, I actually have a client who does that kind of work in that industry, and I would be happy to connect you. She might have some advice on how you could sort of get into that community. So you really sort of tune your ears once you start. It takes a little practice, but then you start hearing opportunities and you go, I know I have something to contribute there. I have a way that I can help. And it may not be what you know. It may be who you know, or it may be a resource, how you know, right? Because you read something that was really helpful.
Such a great point of like, you've got to be looking for it. Like, even just my own life, as we get older, we're kind of thinking we want to be better. And then
sure.
I'll see, and I've been hanging out with some amazing people that I've met with you, through our Heroic Public Speaking together.
Yeah.
And it's just like, sometimes like maybe I'll see one person upset, and then another person, like even before they even start to have a tear, they're up and getting a Kleenex.
Yeah.
It's like, that person's so thoughtful. It's because they just have a natural, I know it's not even natural, because I'm starting to do it more because I'm being around people that are more helpful.
Yeah.
And like, oh wow, like that's that oxytocin of just watching that person get that Kleenex for the other person just made me feel like, oh, that was really kind.
Yeah. And it's so important to recognize, Trevor, that this does not have to be big things. Sometimes when you have experience and you've had a long journey in your career, we sort of dismiss the knowledge that we've gained along the way and how valuable little snippets of that might be to someone who's less experienced. Mm-hmm. So, if you find somebody who's unhappy at work, it doesn't mean you have to go find them a job. Right? It may be that you just connect them with someone. It may be that you just offer a little tip for something, that to you is no big deal, but I can tell you that guy in Boston changed the trajectory of my life because he shared a little bit about what he knew, and then he shared a couple of people he knew, and that was it. He probably forgot about that meeting long after, but I never did. So doesn't have to be big. Small things can make a huge difference for somebody. So how else can I help? How can I make this person's day better so that when they come home, they don't feel like a cog in a machine? They feel like somebody reached out and supported them. That makes a big difference for everybody.
And even the simplest, I mean, you got me thinking the simplicity of like getting back to a person a day later. Is that helpful? Maybe it's that communication part of maybe that's not helpful because they needed it at a different time. But yeah, like what you're saying of like, just you got to listen to know what do they really need? When do they need to get back to you? What's going to be helpful?
And you can always say, hey, if you ever need to chat, I'm here. I'd love to help you in any way I can. Just, let me know. You don't have to come up on somebody if you feel like it's going to freak them out. Just open a conversation and just say, hey, anytime you want to talk about anything, I'm here. I'm really interested in knowing more about you and your experience.
So maybe it's not in that moment. It's not the second follow-up question of how else can I help? It's just coming back a few days later, some space. So, hey, thought about that? Is there something I can help with? Because that was a serious offer.
I love that.
It's not, because otherwise it comes back to that whole, asking how you are and not really not really
Yeah.
looking for the answer. I just got to say this line about it. So Audience Audit is your company. I love what you do. Build your agency's thought leadership and ROI with mind-blowing segmentation research. You are my kind of people, Susan, and I'm reading the sign behind you. Kind people are my kind of people. I love
Yes.
that. And just tell us a little bit about what that all means and how do our listeners follow you, because you've made me feel wanting to be more helpful today.
Oh, you're lovely. Well, thank you. Well, we serve thought leaders, many of them marketing agency owners, like I am an owner. We help them develop their thought leadership on the back of quantitative research. And I'll tell you a funny story, Trevor. My husband, Ron, who was in manufacturing, he's also a Marine and a helicopter pilot. So we would go to conferences together and coffee, we'd be sitting around cocktail parties and somebody would say, "Oh, Susan, what do you do?" And I would say, "I do quantitative attitudinal segmentation research for thought leadership." And they'd go, "Uh-huh." Their eyes would kind of glaze over. And then they'd look at Ron and what do you do? And he'd tell them, and everybody would start taking their clothes off. Like it was just like, it was, oh, you're a Marine. Oh, you're a helicopter pilot. I always felt like the far less glamorous of the pair. But, fundamentally what I do is help people share their expertise where it can be heard by the audiences that they're trying to reach. So for me, mindlessly helpful. Yeah, sometimes mindlessly helpful. But for me, relentlessly helpful is just trying to help people get their smarts out there where it can benefit others and help them learn how to do that in a really generous way instead of sort of that selfish, I got to hold on to this and it's just mine way. So that's what I do.
And you are relentlessly helpful. And from the first day, and anybody that knows you, it's a blessing for you to share this message with our listeners and take the time with us, Susan.
You're very welcome. You are relentlessly helpful as well, Trevor, as I'm sure your listeners will attest.
I have some ideas I'm going to go implement today and just kind of think about this. So thanks so much, Susan. Have an awesome day.
You too, Trevor. Thank you.
Hey folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.